Right,
Are we,
we are live.
we are live. All right, everybody. Well, welcome to Leasing 101. Thanks, everybody, for joining us via webcam, interwebs, however you are joining us today. And I know it's not our Irish potato bar that we were planning on having, but this is definitely the safest way to have this class and to get this information that we think is really important for agents to hear to you guys. I do want to introduce myself. My name is Megan Zellers. For those of you that don't know me, I am the Director of Operations and Associate Broker at RMS team at RE/MAX Center. We primarily focus on property management. That's all we do. So I'd like to call myself an expert, although I am constantly learning new things. And Christy Valley is going to be joining in and helping me with this class. So Christy, do you want to say anything?
Hey everybody, I, of course, when you have leasing issues at RE/MAX Center, and typically the person that you're going to help you solve your issues. So feel free to keep calling me with any questions, and as we go through today's presentation, I'll jump in and answer questions as we go. The best way to ask a question during the presentation is going to be through the chat feature. So you should see a little bubble on your options to click on chat, and just make sure that it's set to show everyone your question, and then we can address your questions as we go through this presentation.
Okay, so we did title this course, Keep Calm, It's Only Leasing. And through this, basically what this class is for is a client contacts you and says, hey, I've got this investment property. I want you to find a tenant for me. So you have a client, what do you do? And so we're going to go over best practices when taking on a rental listing. And these are the things that we're going to cover. We're going to cover the agreements that should be used, how and where should the property be listed, what marketing avenues should you be taking advantage of, how can you capture the most showings for your property, what you're looking for when screening potential tenants for the home, what legalities are involved when you decline an applicant. So we can't accept everybody. We don't want to accept everybody. And there's certain steps that need to be taken when you're declining an application that we'll go through. Pets. Do you want to encourage having pets in the property or not? And what happens if it's a service animal or an emotional support animal? What legally are you required to do? What language is imperative in a lease agreement? When should you collect the security deposit? What is the security deposit exactly? A move-in inspection. Why do we do this? When should we do this? All of the information pertaining to that. And the tenants are in, now what? And then we've also tried to leave plenty of room for questions and answers, which I think a lot of people will have, and we are happy to help out. So first thing to go over, what agreement should be used? It just depends. Are you placing a tenant? Are you just gonna, is it tenant placement only, or are you gonna be managing the property after that tenant is placed? If you are just gonna be placing a tenant, you're going to want to use the form F-122. It's a GAR form. It's the executive exclusive leasing listing agreement. And that is different from the management agreement that would be used if you're actually managing the property. That management agreement, if you're going to be managing the property, is the form F-128, the exclusive leasing and management agreement. The language is different in both forms. The listing agreement basically just allows you to list the property, put a lockbox on the property, advertise, show the home, and screen the applicants. Managing gets a little more involved, where you're collecting the rent, holding the security deposit, performing maintenance, coordinating maintenance, etc. Do we have any questions on agreements? All right, moving on.
Just wait till the end, and then if somebody has something, a question, if it comes up in the chat, I'll let you know.
Okay. So the next slide, how and where should I list these properties? This is a great question. The majority of you should be using Georgia MLS and Georgia MLS. The more exposure, definitely the better. The one thing about FMLS is it's a fee structure. It's starting at $15, and it depends on the monthly rental amount. And let's see, I did have that written down. I know it starts at $1,500, or I'm sorry, $15. And I think it could go all the way up to 500. Is that what I saw? Here it is. Yeah, 100. Sorry, 100. So if the property is up to $14.99 per month, it's a $15 one-time fee to list the property in FMLS. If it's $1,500 to $24.99 a month, the fee is $25. If the monthly rent is $2,500 to $4,999, it's $50 one-time fee. $5,000 and over is $100. So much better than that $500. But those, it's one thing that we've discovered using FMLS and Georgia MLS is Zillow, HotPads, Trulia. Lately, those have been huge websites in the rental market. People, when they're looking for rentals, they automatically go to Zillow, HotPads, Trulia. And they're starting to get a little bit away from that as more and more rental websites are becoming more popular. But the one thing that they've just implemented this month, is it is no longer a complimentary service. You're now having to pay additional if you want your ads listed on Zillow, HotPads, Trulia. Now, if you list your properties in FMLS and Georgia MLS, they're automatically on Zillow, HotPads, Trulia. Otherwise, you're having to pay $2.35 per day per property as it's listed in Zillow. So something to keep in mind when you are marketing your properties. And finally, it is not recommended to use Craigslist. There are so many scams out there. People are taking advantage of when they see a for rent. The Craigslist scammers are saying that they're their properties and collecting money and saying that they'll send them keys. And then of course, they don't have keys to the property. So it's just, there's just a lot of iffiness. So we do deter you from using Craigslist when listing properties. How should I market my listing? So one thing that I harp on all the time is professional photos. It makes a huge difference when you have potential tenants who are scrolling through dozens and dozens of properties. They're usually putting in a zip code or a city, state, and they're given this huge list. And so what is going to set your property apart from others? And one main thing is the professional photos, the quality of the photos. If it's a nice, appealing photo, good lighting, blue skies, that is what attracts somebody to, ooh, let's click and look more into the property. Very similar to when you're listing a property for sale. Vacant properties tend to rent faster than occupied. I have tons of clients who, this surprises them, realtors, it surprises them as well. When I have a small background in sales, I was in sales for a little bit, and we always shied away from vacant properties. We wanted properties that were filled and cozy and warm and looked nice. Well, that is the exact opposite when you've got a rental property. When people are looking for a rental home, they are looking for move-in ready. They need to move by the end of the week, and they want to know what they're getting. So that's why vacant properties do tend to rent a little bit faster than occupied. Clean, that's super important. You don't want tenants to walk into a home that has ring around the toilet and dust bunnies. Dead bugs are a huge thing. So you want to keep on top of that property and make sure that it's clean and presentable. Good curb appeal. Keep that yard maintained when people are driving by. And you want to present the property in the manner that you want the tenants to keep it. My rule of thumb when I'm talking to tenants, when we lease a property, the day that they pick up the keys and we're exchanging security deposit for keys, I tell them how you see the property when you move in. That's how I want you to return it. That clean, free of all trash, personal items, etc. That just makes it a lot easier to turn the property. So how can I capture the most showings and lease the property the quickest? That's my fishing rod, to catch. Be available to show. Nothing is more frustrating to a potential applicant than when they call and nobody answers the phone because they see this house, they want to look at it, and they want to look at it now. But if there's nobody there to answer the phone, that deters potential tenants. And trying to set up a showing, you need to make yourself available and accessible for those showings. If you are not going to be handling those showings, do you have an agent that's going to be doing that for you? Make it easy to schedule an appointment, and once again, quick response time to questions. I'm not sure if you allow texting, but we do have, for RMS team, they allow texting, and we receive a lot of inquiries via text and questions about the application process and more information about the home, and so that response time is very important. And nowadays, texting seems to be the way to go. What am I looking for while screening? So credit, number one, credit. Is there a magic number that you have? That's something that you'll want to discuss with your owner when you're taking on the property. Do they have a limit that they are looking for? We don't necessarily go by an actual credit score RMS team. We're kind of looking at the whole picture when it comes to screening an applicant, because several things could affect their credit. So, you know, if you're not looking at medical collections or other things that could negatively affect their credit, then, you know, you don't want to go by just a score. So you'll want to consider that. The biggest one that we harp on is eviction search. If there's a history of any kind of eviction, dispo, we automatically decline the resident because it's indicative, we feel, of how they're going to be in the future. Criminal background check. When we screen applicants, we're running them through the terrorist checklist, sex offender checklist, and of course a very detailed criminal background check that's nationwide. Income. We recommend 3 times the monthly rental rate. We feel that if they can show that they make 3 times the monthly rent, and we do gross, not net, then that gives them enough money to pay their rent, pay their utilities, and of course any extras that any extra expenses they have per month. So that's the income that we're looking for, but something that you'll want to keep in mind what you're looking for when you're screening a tenant. Employment, you'll want to verify that they are employed, and that could be looking at pay stubs. We recommend getting the last 2 weeks worth or last 2 pay stubs. That's generally a month of pay stubs. I like to see that year to date when I'm looking at the pay stubs, so I know that they've been employed for a while, and I can kind of average what they're going to make monthly if the salary isn't consistent. Sometimes if they don't have pay stubs, you'll want to ask for tax returns. If they're independent contractors or have their own business, we'll want to look at the last 2 years of tax returns to check their income, expenses, etc. Just looking for that 3 times the monthly rental rate. And rental history, big one. I always want to know what kind of tenants I'm getting. And so checking with their previous landlords is huge with me. Now you have to be careful the questions that you ask when you're getting a rental verification. Basically, it's, did they pay their rent? If were they late? Did they get their security deposit back? And I will slip in, if they didn't get their security deposit back, why? Sometimes it's answered, sometimes it's not. Christy, did you have anything to chime in about rental history?
No, I just think that when it comes to being responsive to anybody calling on any property or anyone wanting to put in an application, make sure that you're giving everyone the same information. So if you're showing the property, make sure you're always offering an application to every single person that you're showing it to. And that's just fair housing, making sure that you're treating every prospect the same. And I know that with rentals, sometimes we don't think that we need to treat them the same way as sales, but absolutely 100% have to make sure that everybody gets a call back, everybody gets treated the same, everybody gets offered an application to put in on the property.
And I think that's perfect. It leads into our next slide, talking about fair housing. It's huge. When you are processing an application, it is best practice to have a written policy for processing applications. It needs to be consistent and follows fair housing, federal, state, and local laws. If we have it presented on our website, these are the check boxes pretty much that we're looking for. So we're pretty transparent with our applicants of, if you have a criminal history, if it's one of these things, we can't accept you. So you'll want to make sure to have a written policy in place. So that way, if you have to defend yourself, you've got that in writing. Fair housing protected classes. I believe you guys are pretty familiar with this because it's the same in sales, but color, disability, familial status, national origin, race, religion, sex. These are all protected classes. And if you are declining an application, believe me, it can come up and question, why are you declining me? What's the reason? So that leads into the next slide. When you are declining an application, you need to send what's called an adverse action letter. And that basically the letter says you've been declined because of credit, criminal background check, you don't make enough income, but it stresses why they're being declined. For the Fair Credit Act prohibits us from discussing anything that was in their credit report. So if they ask you what exactly was in my credit report, why did I get declined? Do not answer their question. Just let them say, or don't not answer their question, but say, the Fair Credit Act prohibits me from discussing what was in your credit report. In the adverse action letter that's sent, typically there's a link that directs them to where that credit report was obtained, and they will be allowed to get a copy themselves so they can see for themselves. Another very important thing, if you are accepting an applicant, but you're requiring an additional deposit to accept that applicant, or you're changing the terms of the lease, anything that was advertised, if you're changing that, meaning time of the lease duration, then you will want to send that adverse action letter.
Basically, if anything from your application resulted in a change of terms. Now, if the tenant requested an 18-month lease and we've advertised 12 months, you're not required to send an adverse action. The landlord is now requiring an 18-month lease because of something on the application, or the landlord wants extra deposit, extra rent, anything in addition, that's when you have to send it. Even if you're approving them based on those terms, it's different from the original terms advertised. And so that's where that requirement comes in.
Pets.
Yay.
And so one of the first things that I get usually when I take on an owner is, I don't want pets. I do not want pets in my home. I get that. And this is a conversation to have with your client. Okay, that's definitely your prerogative not to have pets if you don't want to allow pets. I do know some children that have done more damage than pets, but children are a protected class, so familial status. But the one thing to stress to your owners is, if you don't allow pets, you are narrowing your tenant pool, if you will, because I think the latest study was something like 88% of renters have pets, whether it be a walking rug, like a 9-year-old lab, or a teeny tiny little chihuahua. The majority of renters do have pets, so it can take longer for the house to lease if they don't allow them. It's definitely good practice. If you're going to have a pet, you want to charge some sort of pet deposit. Some people even charge a pet rent, and that's whether you make it refundable, partially refundable. That's going to be up to you, but you'll want to consider that, and you'll also want to have that pet addendum. The GAR form does offer the pet addendum. Basically, it says who the pet is, what kind of pet it is. So That way, only that pet is allowed in the property, and it spells out what the requirements are. If when the tenants move out, does a flea and tick treatment need to be done? Um, do the carpets need to be professionally cleaned? Will part of their deposit be refunded? But it outlines all of that. Now, I should have left this one last on the screen, but let's talk about service animals and emotional support animals. So if you have a tenant or an applicant come to you and say, I know your property doesn't allow dogs, but it's a service animal. At that point, it's not an animal, it's not a pet. It becomes what I try and explain to my owners, an occupant. So we cannot collect a pet deposit and we cannot charge additional rent because it's considered an occupant, like their child. And you absolutely have the right to request documentation showing that it is a service animal or an emotional support animal. You do not have the right to decline the application because there's a support animal. That's opening yourself up to a discrimination suit. I'm anticipating a lot of questions about that one.
So let's bring up the fact, Megan, that a lot of people are asking, and the question that we get asked is, okay, somebody says they have a service animal and it's a pit bull.
That's a great question.
And so I think that's one of the questions that we get asked on a regular basis is, if it's a protected or an animal that an insurance company per se would deem, a higher risk, how are we handling service animals that fall into that category?
So it is a huge catch-22. So, and that's a great point. There is a list that the insurance companies provide that they consider dangerous breeds. And so we are allowed to say no to those pit bulls, Dobermans, Rottweilers, Huskies are even on that list, Chows. Those dogs are considered dangerous breed, and we cannot rent to them. If the insurance company comes in and sees that we've allowed a pet, they can cancel that landlord's homeowners homeowners insurance policy, and that's a big risk. Now, when it comes to emotional support and service animals, what do you do? Because and it has come up. My pit bull is a service animal. Well, you can't decline the service animal because then you open yourself up to a fair housing suit. But at the same time, if you accept this pit bull, the insurance company is threatening to cancel the insurance policy. At that point, what's in best practice for your clients is you accept the pit bull, you accept the service animal, and if the insurance drops their insurance, that's a whole other lawsuit waiting, that you can have with your insurance company. I think more and more insurance companies are now on board with understanding the ramifications of declining a pet, but it now becomes between the insurance company and your client, if that's the case, if they've dropped it. Because for them to decline the emotional support animal or the service animal, that's against the law. But it's definitely a catch-22, and one that I sit on the board of directors for an organization of property managers, and we've got a legislative branch or a legislative team that we're definitely fighting for these kinds of issues, bringing them to lawmakers' attention and saying, hey, what do? We need some more direction on this and some better protection for our clients.
Okay, Denise has asked, is the insurance company likely to drop insurance coverage if it is a certified, documented service animal? So typically, no. It is dependent on the insurance company. Every insurance company handles these things differently, but they also know that we have to follow the service animal laws, and they themselves have to follow the same laws. So, yes, we have to, go with what the state and federal law is, which is that we have to allow them no matter what the breed is. And we've actually at RMS had service animals that are pit bulls, and they were some of the best, well-mannered dogs I've ever met. Like, perfect. The tenants were deaf, and these were their service animals, and they were able to provide documentation, and we did not have an issue with the insurance company. So I know sometimes we tend to think that tenants are just trying to get away with things, and we've got to give them the benefit of the doubt that it is a true service animal. And any documentation they send us to prove is what we go on. We have to go on whatever documentation they send us. We have one more question about this. If someone says I have a peacock or an anaconda, actual proven service animals, this is clearly taking advantage of the system. So for the safety of the neighbors, why should I be required to accept them?
Because it's against the law if you don't. If it is a documented service animal or an emotional support animal, at that point, as I mentioned before, it is not an animal. It now is an occupant, and to protect your clients that can open them up to a huge. Well, I've got a great example why you don't decline emotional support or service animals. RMS team just took on an owner that their property was no pets, advertised everywhere, no pets. The tenant moves in, and the tenant calls the owner and says, hey, my mom can't take these dogs anymore. I'm going to be bringing them. Do you need a pet deposit? Or what do I need to sign to have these dogs in the property? My owner said, this is a no pet property. It was advertised that way. Next thing you know, she has documentation saying that there's both her husband has a support animal and she is a support animal, now allowing the two dogs in the property. The owner still refused to allow because she thought she had proper documentation where the tenant explained what was going on. They went to court. The tenant won. The judge sided with the tenant, and not only did the management company that placed the tenant, it was not RMS team, they had to pay the tenants $1,000. The owner had to pay the tenants $1,000, and now still has the pets in the property. So when it comes to those service animals and emotional support animals, it's not worth it. It's not worth the attorney's fees, the court time, court costs, and then the penalties that are put upon you and your client.
Okay, Denise has a good question. What happens if this new occupant, because we're treating this service animal as an occupant, causes the number of occupants to exceed the county occupancy guideline? It's not going to matter, Denise. Service animals are in their own category. We just tend to explain it to owners that you just need to think of this as an additional occupant because it's no longer considered a pet. Pets and service animals have two very different distinctions. A service animal cannot be denied, basically, the ability to be on the property. Any documentation that person has from any kind of position or even, Megan, we've gotten documentation from like chiropractors on emotional support animals or psychologists or therapists. Any documentation presented, we have to accept it at its face value and allow the service animal or the emotional support animal. Otherwise, you are putting yourself and your landlord at risk for additional, lawsuits. So basically, there's no way out of it. Sorry.
There is a great resource out there that RMS team does use. It's called petscreening.com. And basically what they do is they screen the animal for you. And we've kind of put it upon a third party to make that discrimination, if you will. They know what questions to ask, what documentation to look for. And if the service animal is denied, it's coming from them and not from RMS team. So the burden falls on the tenant to provide the appropriate documentation to petscreening.com. I'm happy to give you more information after the presentation, or if you want to reach out to me individually, I can give you that information. But it does take a lot of, basically how it works is the applicant has to sign up their animal, they have to basically fill out an application for their animal, and they determine on this website whether it's a support animal, emotional or service animal, emotional support animal, or just a pet, and they're uploading pictures, shot records, all of this stuff, and it spits out a PAW score, if you will, and that's how RMS team figures out what we're going to charge deposit-wise from this PAW score. And once again, it does relieve us the burden of making sure the documentation for a service animal, emotional support animal is appropriate and it's coming from them.
Okay, so back to a service animal question. They're asking, in the case of where they had a lawsuit with the $1,000 judgment on each side, did they have the service animal paperwork prior to the owner?
Nope.
No.
Nope. They had the email to the owner that was dated on, let's say, the 9th of the month. The letter from the physician was dated on the 10th of the month, and that still didn't hold up in court.
And so at any point during the lease, just so you know, at any point during the lease, there can be a service animal added. You don't have to have like permission. The tenant just has to provide you with the documentation that they have a service animal, and then the service animal is allowed to be on the property. It doesn't need to happen before they lease the property. It can happen at any point during the lease. And Denise, Megan can email you that information on petscreening.com.
Sure.
All right. Moving on.
Moving on. Well, it's the service animals, emotional support animals. It's such a huge topic right now in management, and everybody's correct. People do take advantage of the system. So our job is to just protect ourselves, protect our clients. So let's talk about language. What's important in the lease? Basically, everything in the GAR form is important to your lease. The best way to protect yourself and to protect your clients is use that GAR form. Use those resources that are provided for you. We say the GAR form because if you think about it, there's a committee, it's a forms committee, and they sit around and they talk. One of the members of this committee, Christy and I know him well. He has been in management for 100 bajillion years and has seen the ins and outs of you think you've seen everything, but then you're presented with nuances that you're like, oh gosh. But anyway, this particular gentleman, he's seen a lot, knows a lot, and he's a huge source of this committee's, or the huge source of these forms. And so he really, the committee has really worked hard to make sure that your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, taking into consideration their experience and what they've encountered. So use those GAR forms, and even using those GAR forms, if you look at the RMS team lease, we still have several special steps. So you'll want to read through your management agreement, read through your lease, read through your listing agreement, and make sure there isn't additions that you need to put in there. As far as the lease goes, we have additional special steps. They're talking about partial payments. Do we accept partial payments? Are you going to accept partial payments? We frown upon that because once you accept a payment, you're obligating now the owner to accept or continue with that lease. Whereas if you don't allow partial payments and the tenant doesn't pay their rent, you can start that dispo process. That's a whole other class that we'll have to talk about, but things to consider: partial payments. Are you going to are you going to accept those? How should maintenance requests be submitted? Are you going to allow your tenants to call you or call the owner and let them know what's wrong? Or are you going to require them in writing so you've got a paper trail of everything? Do your tenants need to be present at the move-in and the move-out inspection, or can you do those on your own and have them sign off on them? How do you want the resident to submit their termination of lease? Are you going to require a 60-day notice online, or do you need it in writing, or is a phone call acceptable? And prorated rent, you definitely need to include that in your special steps. I don't believe it's in the GAR form, and you need to specify the amount of the prorated rent and what dates it's covering.
Very good.
When do I need to collect the security deposit? So Georgia state law states that the security deposit cannot be collected unless there's a signed lease and a move-in inspection to go along with that. So several management companies or property managers will meet the resident at the property. They'll walk through the property with the tenant, and then they'll hand over the keys while they're collecting that security deposit. You cannot collect the security deposit before you have that
inspection.
Correct. But this kind of leads into, well, if I'm taking the property off the market, like the tenants don't want to move in for 2 weeks, how can I secure the property so that they move in, they don't walk away from it? And so a lot of property managers will collect what's called a reservation fee. And for example, our MS team, once we accept an application, the applicants have 24 hours to bring us the reservation fee. We equate that to the first month's rent. And then what we do is we apply that reservation fee. Once the lease is signed, security deposits collected, yay, they're in there. We apply that reservation fee to the first month's rent. And so they're not paying rent for the first month. Well, they've already paid it. So, but we do take a reservation fee and we make it non-refundable. So that way, if they happen to back out, we and the owner are not, impacted by the fact that it was taken off the market for however long it was. And should you make your deposit refundable? So we make our security deposits fully refundable at the end of the lease. And it's more of an incentive to take care of the property and make sure that it's clean and damage free and all items are removed out of the property. So the security deposit is exactly what it is. It's a deposit for security of the property. And so it should be refundable at the end of the lease.
Your GAR is automatically written to allow this to be fully refundable. It's only if you were to write some steps that would cancel that out. We have had tenants decide not to move in after they've paid a deposit. And because there was no inspection completed and provided to the tenant, the deposit goes back to the tenant. There's no way for us to legally collect and hold a security deposit without that move-in inspection. Even if they've signed the lease, we have to give it back, and there's no way to enforce the lease at that point. So make sure that you're not collecting security deposits before you're providing move-in inspections or evaluations. That's one of the things that I see in broker support on a regular basis with leases. We think it's okay just to go ahead and collect the security deposit when we get the lease signed. And that is not how the law is written. And it does come back to bite us sometimes. So just try to remember that if you want to hold the property with funds, it needs to be done as a reservation fee.
So that leads us into that move-in inspection. The who, what, when, where, why. So when should the inspection be performed? It needs to be performed prior to the residents taking possession of the property. And whether or not they are present at the inspection, they don't have to be. You can do the move-in inspection before they even move into the property and actually send it along with the lease. And they're signing off on the move-in inspection with the lease. We give them 3 business days. So they'll move into the property. They've already signed off on the move-in inspection and the lease. And then they have 3 business days if there's any discrepancies to notate those and get them back to us. But many property managers, they like meeting their tenants at the property at that model that I mentioned before, where they're doing the walkthrough with the tenant and signing off right then and there at the property. Information that should be in the report. It used to be where you could just make a checklist of things, of items that, were not okay. But one thing that we have found is photographs are huge. Ever since I've been in property management, I've always taken photos of the property, the move-in photos and then move-out photos, because I just feel like it's very difficult to argue with a photograph. So if the tenant moves out and says that scratch was on the wall when I moved in, it's a lot easier to show them the photo that they signed off on that said, that shows there was no scratch on that wall. So I always include photos. That's up to your discretion, but you definitely want to notate the condition of each room. You'll want to notate if there's appliances, what appliances, make, model number is good. And why is this important? Because in order to charge the security deposit for damages that a tenant might do, you have to have a written move-in inspection and then a written move-out inspection, comparing to the two. And you basically need to be able to prove this was in fact damages, and the property was not like this when they moved in. It happened when they were residing in the home. It's their damage, and this is why we're taking it out of their security deposit.
Any questions on move-ins?
Now what? So now we got a tenant approved. We got him in the property. We got the move-in inspection done. Now I just have to sit back and collect rent. There's a little bit more involved than that. As I mentioned, we are going to be presenting a part 2 of this, hopefully in person, that will go over the day-to-day management of a property. But some things that we did want to touch on today is collecting the rent. Stick to your lease. If your lease says that you are going to charge a late fee on day 4, charge that late fee each and every time. And I can't stress this enough, because if you waive a late fee for one tenant and they happen to be talking to another tenant and they're like, hey, they didn't waive my late fee, all of a sudden you're charged with a discrimination suit. I mean, silly it sounds, but it's always best practice to enforce the lease. Plus it makes it easier on you, because you can just say, here it is in black and white. This is what you agreed to. I don't know what argument you have. So collect that rent. Do not be lenient with late fees. They signed off agreeing to the terms of the lease, so you just remind them about that. Same with enforcing the lease. If there's unauthorized occupants, unauthorized pets, smoking, anything that's against that lease, they signed off at the very beginning with acknowledging that they understood what was required of them, and they can't go back on it now. Coordinate maintenance. So one of the biggest causes of vacancies is maintenance. And it's very, very important to stay on top of those maintenance requests, make sure that the tenants, their needs are being addressed. Habitability is huge. You don't want it to be 102 degrees outside and the air conditioning's out and you don't address it, because then it just leads into a nightmare of they're paying to get it fixed. They're not paying their rent because you're not fixing the air conditioning, and it's a habitability issue that they would win in a court of law. You'll want to send proper notices. If they're late paying the rent, you want to send that notice. You are now late. This is what you need to do. Pay your rent. If it's a lease violation, be on top of that. Make sure that you're sending notices. Hey, you're in violation of your lease. This is the violation. This is the quote from the lease that you're violating. You're going to want to manage your dispo and eviction. Be diligent with filing dates. So if the rent isn't paid, you need to have a date that you are filing that eviction, filing with the courts. Hey, rent's not paid, and it needs to be consistent. And just keep in mind that evictions can take anywhere from 30 to, we've seen 90 days, even longer now. 30 days is very, very, very rare that it can happen that quick.
With that said, I know you probably already heard, but the courts have delayed for 30 days any filings or service of dispossessory notices. So if you have a tenant that's late in April, really, if they're already late in March, it's definitely delayed. But if you have late payers in April, when you go to file for dispossessory and eviction, you need to be letting your owners know we're looking at a 30 to 45 day minimum delay, because it's going to take the courts a while to get back on track. So we are in kind of a strange time with dispossessories and evictions, where we don't know exactly how long it's going to take. You know, We've been through similar, not where courts are closed, but we've been through similar delays. That you should be, prepared that if we're filing an eviction or an accessory at this point in time, we normally would tell people 45 to 60 days. We're looking at an additional 30 to 45 days minimum. We're talking about a 90 to 120 day process right now for evictions, just FYI.
If you think all the courts are closed, and so if you just think of the backlog that we don't know when they're coming back or when everybody's going back to work, but if you can just imagine what the backlog is. So you do want to be diligent. I think you can file still. You'll have to check with the individual county. So you can at least, it's filed, but nothing's going to happen with it because there's nobody there to do anything with it. So, I don't know we file ours through a third party that does everything electronically for the most part. And so we will continue with them and they'll handle that part. It's just, as I said, there's nobody there to do anything with them, or if it gets to the point where it goes to court, it will be a backlog. So hunker down.
Yeah, this is going to be a time when we normally would not tell you to negotiate with your tenants. But for your landlord's sake, you might come up with a payment arrangement if you can get them to agree to a payment arrangement for a month, for 2 or 3 months, just to get through the next couple of months.
Yes.
If you need help with payment arrangements with tenants, it does have to be an addendum. It has to be signed by all parties. That has to be something. It can't just be an email back and forth. It needs to be a lease amendment. So if anybody gets into a situation where you need help with those kinds of things, let me know, because you're going to have tenants that are going to potentially have trouble paying, and they may have forbearance options through the state. I don't know. There may be grant options available for them, but just contact me if you run into those issues, and we can help walk you through those.
And I'm also happy to be a resource as well. So, and at the end of the presentation, I'll give out my contact information to everyone. But moving down the list, if we haven't scared you already, so collections. If they leave owing money, how are collections going to be handled? Are you going to handle that? Are you going to push that on your owner? But that's part of the management process. You want to make sure, most important, to follow landlord-tenant law. Educate yourself. If you see classes on property management law or any kind of really property management class, I feel like I'm a sponge. I love learning and expanding that net and trying to soak in as much information as I can. And landlord-tenant law fascinates me for whatever reason it does. The rules are so different in the rental business than it is in sales, and it's just but pay attention to that. Make sure that you're following those laws, because as we've mentioned some stories throughout this course, it can turn around on you quite quickly. Remember who you're representing. The owner is your client. That's who you want to keep. The tenants absolutely have rights, and you want to make sure to keep the tenants happy. The motto around my office is happy tenant equals happy owner equals happy landlord. Now, we definitely want to keep those tenants happy, but not to the point where they're taking advantage of the owner, of course. So just remember that you are there representing your owner. And most important, call broker support. We have been, I think, in property management about the same amount of time, because we met very, very innocent, not knowing a thing. And that's when we met quite some time ago. And we've learned a lot through the years. We've seen a lot. For a while there, I can speak for Christy. Property management was her main focus. It's been my main focus for the last 11 years. So I've dabbled a little bit in sales for a minute, but the majority of my focus has been this. This is all I do. So contact us, call us. Don't make the mistake. Just run it by us first. And then we're going to talk about leasing services. Christy, do you want to go over that? I feel like they've heard me enough.
Sure. Yeah, I can. So leasing services at RE/MAX Center is available to all agents, whether you are just wanting an application process for a rental that you have listed, or if you want full back-end property management support. Either way, Leasing Services is available. So what happens if you just want application processing? There's a website halfway down on the screen, atlantaleasingcenter.com, and that's where you would send anybody that you want them to run an application on, and you'll get a report from us saying we recommend accept, decline, or additional deposit. As part of that process, we do help make sure that the adverse actions get sent out as required, and we do all the screening for you. So you basically just wait for us to make a recommendation for you when it comes to application processing. For those of you that do want to do property management, we provide access to our software, Propertyware. That gives your owner and your tenant a portal where they can submit payments and look at their lease documents. It also allows us to give you access so you're able to see when the tenant has paid. And we will process any kind of payments to the owner for you. So when the tenant pays their rent, hopefully they're paying online, but if they're not, we can process paper checks still too. When the tenant pays their rent, we'll process that through the correct account and make sure that it gets processed back out to your owner. We do direct deposit to our landlords and owners, so that is an option. And it's really convenient for your owners that you're managing property for. Our application fee did just recently go up. So it says $50 on this page, but it is $55 when you go to the website. It just recently updated. And then our service to provide back-end management support is $15 per month per property. And that just gets paid from the management fee. So whatever management fee you're charging your client is set up in the system, and then we charge the $15 to manage, making sure the payments received, sending out any late letters required, making sure the monies get put back to the owner. And we are required to do annual reporting for 1099s and rents received. And so all of that is provided within the leasing services. Does anybody have any questions about how leasing services work? If you do have additional questions or if you want to use these services, we're happy to meet with you one-on-one and review it with you. We have several agents in the office that use these services, and I think it's a time saver for a lot of our agents using this so that they can focus on bringing on more properties that they do want to manage. They're not having to try to figure out how to post rents to a ledger and pay their owners through direct deposit. We've got that covered for them. The fee for leasing services is $15 per property per month.
15.
That
15.
15. Lori, can you hear that? They said my microphone wasn't working very well before.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I guess I should have talked. Sorry.
Yes, no, I heard. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Denise, for joining us. Yes, this is recorded, so we can provide the slides and the presentation to you after.
So now do we want to open it up for questions?
Yes, any questions? Stump the property manager, what is it? Stump the chumps.
Well, I mean, do we want them to be able to unmute and then they can just talk, or we're still chatting?
Either way, you can either unmute and ask, or you can put it through the chat. So what about the fee Zillow is requiring to list rentals? So they're only requiring it if you are not already listed through MLS or Georgia MLS. So most agents, I believe, are putting their properties in Georgia MLS and FMLS. If you're not, I'm not sure why you wouldn't, but if you're not, then if you want it on Zillow, you would have to set up a separate account with Zillow and pay them separately. And that fee, I think, came out to be somewhere around $2 or $2.35 per property per day.
$2.35, and that's Zillow, Trulia, and Hot Pads.
So for exposure to those three, if you don't put it in the Georgia MLS or MLS, then that's a pretty heavy price to pay. It is less expensive to pay the FMLS fee, even though it
Absolutely. Because FMLS is just a one-time fee per listing. Now, keep in mind, if you take it off the market and put it back, I think there's a charge for that. I'm not 100% sure. I'll look into that for sure. But it's always going to be cheaper than $2.35 a day per listing.
So our plan is to do another in-person class. If there are topics that you want us to go over in the next class, we will certainly address those. I think we could dig down into any of these topics to the nth degree of what to do if this happens or what to do if that happens. But if there's something specific you want us to review when it comes to managing property, let us know. The next class will be more specific on showing you what our platform looks like in leasing services and answering any questions with regards to managing a property, like what to do with HOA violations. We'll get down to being able to help you with those things. But let us know. We'd like to know your feedback on what information you're looking for.
And then just so that you guys know, the best way to reach me, if you go to RMS Team's website, www.rmsteam.com, that's a good way to contact me, or it's Megan, MEGAN, at rmsteam.com. And so shoot me a quick email. I'm happy to respond, or if you want to talk, that's fine. But as I mentioned before, please use me as a resource. I'm happy to help.
Any questions that you have about leasing specifically can also be directed to broker support. I do get copied in on those when it comes to leasing. So you can contact me directly, or you can just go to broker support. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up. Unless anybody has any other questions, we'll be in contact with you soon about the next in-person class. Too bad we couldn't do lunch today. We have a ton of potatoes because we were doing a big potato bar.
We're good on sour cream and bacon, and
we'll be eating potatoes for weeks and weeks and weeks. But if you need us, we are available. We're both available to do video chat with you, screen shares to show you anything. And hopefully within a few weeks, we'll be able to schedule an in-person class.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us and for putting up with this was my first class. So I really appreciate your patience and all of your questions. It's great. And we will see you guys later.